Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this event this morning. My name is Jenny Wiley-Legat, and I'm the Associate Director of the Center for the Study of Religion. And for purposes of this weekend, I'm also asterisk 08 of the grad school. And for purposes of today, I'm also a native Texan and the daughter of a rabid Dallas Cowboys fan. My mom is looking on from Texas Stadium in the sky and smiling this morning. She would be very excited. So Jason Garrett, class of '89, has made a name for himself on and off football fields, both here at Princeton and in fields around the country, most notably a certain hallowed patch of ground in Arlington, Texas. At Princeton, Garrett was the star quarterback of the Tigers. As the senior team captain in 1988, Garrett was named the Ivy League Player of the Year and honorable mention All-American. More importantly, he led Princeton to its first victory over Yale in New Haven in more than 2 decades. Degree in history in 1989. In 2015, the Princeton Varsity Club honored Garrett with the Citizen Athlete Award. And in 2019, Garrett was recognized as Princeton's honoree for the Ivy Football Association. In his 7 years as a Cowboy player, Garrett was a key reserve player on 3 Super Bowl teams. He's best remembered for his 1994 Thanksgiving Day heroics. Making his second career start against Green Bay, Garrett led Dallas to a thrilling 42-31 comeback from behind victory. Garrett entered the coaching profession in 2005 and returned to Dallas in 2007 as the offensive coordinator. Garrett was elevated to be the 8th head coach in Dallas Cowboys history in January 2011. He went on to guide a 1-7 Dallas team to a 5-3 mark down the stretch. Following the 2016 season, Garrett was named NFC and NFL Coach of the Year. In 8.5 years as head coach, Garrett owns a 79-62 overall record. Jason and his wife, Brill Aldridge Garrett, class of '88, founded the Jason Garrett Starfish Charities in 1997 with the goal of enriching the lives of young people. And I believe you're going to hear from David more about those endeavors. So in conversation with Jason this morning, we have Professor David W. Miller, the founder and director of the Princeton University Faith and Work Initiative, which is housed within our Center for the Study of Religion. David teaches in the religion department, where his signature and highly popular course is Business Ethics, How to Succeed Without Selling Your Soul. David brings an unusual bilingual perspective to the academic and business world. In his previous life, he spent 16 years in senior executive positions in international business and finance. After his corporate experience, he earned an MDiv and PhD in ethics from Princeton Theological Seminary. While doing his doctoral work, David began working with executives, and he continues to serve as an advisor to several corporate CEOs and senior executives on questions pertaining to ethics, leadership, and the role of faith at work. David Miller is the author of God at Work, The History and Promise of the Faith at Work movement. He is currently focused on updating God at Work in a revised edition, in addition to 2 other books, Sky Pilots, focused on workplace chaplaincy, and The Integration Profile, which develops a psychometric assessment tool for faith and work. So we are very pleased to have 2 speakers with us. So please join me in welcoming them.
Thank you, Jenny. All right. Thanks, Jenny. Thank you so much. That was so nice. Good work. I just stand here a second. Go ahead. So thank you all for coming, Jason, Brill in particular. You notice the front row fans. What do you see here? What do you see?
These guys.
For those who are in the back, what do you see in here, Jason?
The guy on the left is the smart one. He's got an Ezekiel Elliott shirt on. But this guy in the middle, he's got some green jersey, number 11. I don't know who that is. And I don't know who 13 from the Giants is either.
You know, Jason,
I like this one right here.
someone from the behind-the-scenes team, who are the folks who make all this possible at reunions, she wrote me, she said, I've gotten several people asking, why don't we have an Eagles person here? So, hey. But look, let me make a couple comments. So Jason and I, we obviously have very different lives and very different careers, but there's some uncanny parallels in our life. You're a New Jersey boy. Obviously, you had this peripatetic life, moved all around, but started in Monmouth Beach and get there all the time, the Jersey Shore. I grew up in Jersey. I'm a local kid, too, and you went to, I think, Rumson Holy Cross or Holy Catholic Church in Rumson. My mom grew up in Little Silver and in Rumson, so I spent all my time in the same beach as you did, skipping school, I might add. We're each Bruce Springsteen fans, I've found out, and I'll tell you a story maybe later about that. We also did something really smart. We each married our best friend. So Brill, it's great you're here. My wife is also really, really smart and blonde and wonderful, and both of you went to Harvard Law School. So, and you didn't overlap, but it's pretty amazing, these connections. You're beach people, and you spent a lot of your childhood in Key Biscayne, which is where Karen and I have another home, and we spent a lot of time. So I feel like we kind of have something providential going on. Yet on the other hand, I am not the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. Let's make that really clear what I'm not. So the similarities drop quickly. And we're going to talk, the goal of this series that we do is we talk about the intersection of faith and work and what it's like in the C-suite and leadership positions. And I interview people of all different traditions who kind of tell their story. I don't know if you want to look over your shoulder a little bit here, Jason. I'm just going to go power through a couple slides. So this is the organization that I run. It's a joy and privilege to do that. By the way, when I learned at IBM, and give a shout out to Bill Powers, Kevin Weiss, Don Seitz, and Peter Funke. We all met in class of 1979. I was a Bucknell grad, but we met at the IBM training program. We've kind of been joined at the hip ever since. But one thing we were taught is know your customer. And my investment banking days, KYC, know your customer. So who all here played football at Princeton in the alumni players? Show of hands. All right, so we know who we're talking to. All right. Who all, hey there, Marcus, who all plays now on the team? All right. Is that you, Kevin? Okay. Our quarterback. Yeah. Which coaches are here from the team? And that's a big shout out to them, indeed. And last, to find out who will keep me most honest, are any of my current or former students here? Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, it's great to see you all. So a couple slides. So this is what we do. I interview people, just have extraordinary life stories, and they talk about Jack Bogle. We've done, I don't know this guy, what's his name? Bill Powers. Yeah, he was an interviewee once. And who else do we have here? Mark Allen, who's dealing with a tough situation at Boeing these days. Really an amazing, terrific guy. And he talked about how his faith helps him kind of keep anchored amidst stress. First ever husband-wife couple. And Marion is one of the first women to graduate here. And last year at reunions had one of our trustees, Laura Faris, who's the number 2, the COO up at the of New York Presbyterian in New York. And here's just a couple other people we've had. Kevin Weiss, who's also sitting here, has been one of my victims. Oh, I'm sorry.
Exactly.
So the question is, are we going to do the Larry Springer thing or the Oprah thing? Well,
I'm nervous regardless.
Well, I'm not going to do Charlie Rose, I'll tell you that. With that, why don't you come on up and let's start our conversation. How about another round for Jason? Oh wait, there's more, look. So we're going to do a quick flat. Pay attention to these numbers here. So Jason has 7 siblings, and you're right here. Is this you?
That's me.
I
right
noticed
there.
There's a certain hair color thing going on. Right, Mary? I
got a baseball uniform on underneath that right there. We got to get ready for the picture. Get ready for the picture. We just kind of pulled it on.
I love it. This is a little bit later. And this is with your mom and dad. We're going to talk about your folks also in a minute because they played an influential role in your life. So here we are, cover of Alumni Weekly, the old Pa. That's you, your senior year when you had just a terrific story to tell. You remember this? So tell us, so this is your senior year, old Chinese proverb, that's what you picked. Fall down 7 times, get up 8. Why'd you pick that?
I thought it was wise at the time. I can't begin to tell you how wise it actually was. That guy, Fred Heinlein, was one of my high school coaches and certainly one of the most impactful people in my life, and that's something that he's, all right.
Wow. Made a difference.
Yeah, it's an important thing in life. And I was probably 16, 17 years old when he shared that with me, and it's certainly been significant. So I apologize, but
no, I appreciate you showing who you are.
He's something else. That guy. He was He was the head baseball coach at Shaker Heights High School in Cleveland for 33 years, won state championships, and then came to our school probably in his late 60s. And it's amazing the people you get a chance to be around when you're young who can be so impactful. My parents certainly had a huge impact, but I had great coaches, and he was one of them, and that's something I think about a lot.
Well, I guess as a quarterback, you do get knocked down now and then, so it's a particularly important one to remember.
You know, I did something earlier with Karan Reed, who was a great player here and actually played for us with the Cowboys last year. And the first word out of his mouth, he was talking about what you learn from football, and he used the word adversity. And that's what it is. Life and football, it's about adversity and how you come back from it. So I had good people around me when I was young kind of teaching me the importance of that. We're all going to get knocked down. It's what you do, how you respond to that. So I think it's an important thing in life.
Well, we're going to come back there. Let me just show a couple more things to put your trajectory in place. So 17 is another number that's special to you, near and dear. That's your two brothers up there in the upper left, and you again. That's heaving one of those amazing touchdown passes in the Thanksgiving game, number 17 again. So you all saw this issue earlier in the year. Every decade, Princeton figures out who are our top 25 most influential alumni. Well, get this. Number 25 is you. And by the way, it's true. I did not Photoshop this. I mean, it's pretty darn cool. And we could think there's like hundreds of people are most influential. But not just there. Even more important than this, we all know this room, don't we? And here you're even number 24. So it's very cool. But at any rate, and here is now, of course, number 1, Brill. Thank you for helping make this happen, too. Let's give Brill a shout out. You talk a lot about, as I've been preparing for this, we've never met before, by the way. We're introduced courtesy of Bill Powers and some other friends we have. And it's been one of the words that keeps coming up with you all the time is team. You two are a team as a couple. You learned about teams as a boy. You've talked something about your father, and condolences, I know he passed earlier this year, and it was a very tough time for you, I bet. What are a couple things you take away from your father?
Well, when you see that picture, I have 7 brothers and sisters. We're all a year apart. My dad was a football coach. My mom was and is a saint. We moved all over the country as he was pursuing his career. Went to a lot of different grade schools. Was fortunate by the time I got to junior high, we moved to Cleveland, Ohio, and we lived there from the time I was in 7th grade till my freshman year of college. So there was some stability in some important years. But when you're moving around, and we always had 3 dogs. My aunt was always living with us. My grandmother, my great uncle. All these people were always around, and so you learn consciously or subconsciously what team is all about. And my dad was a huge influence in that regard. There's never anything we wanted for as we were growing up, but we all kind of learned that we had to function together in life. And my parents were great examples of how to do that. You had to learn how to interact with each other. You had to learn how to sacrifice. And so as you kind of navigate through life, you realize that it ain't about the individual, it's about the team. I tell a story to our team a lot. We moved to Cleveland, Ohio when I was in 7th grade, and went to a school called St. Anne's, and Mrs. Thelman was my science teacher. It was a new school, and we typically descended on schools. I mean, we're all a year apart. We show up, and it's like, who are these guys?
The Garretts are coming, run away.
So I show up in the first day of science class. Mrs. Thelman says, okay, you 4 go over there, you 4 go over there, you 4 go over there. We're going to have a project here in a couple of weeks. You guys figure out what the project is and who does what in the presentation. And so we spent the whole science class over with these guys, like these buddies of mine, guys I was playing football with. And I came home that day, and I'm like, this school's easy, Mom. I mean, this is so easy. I mean, it's like, I'm used to school where you kind of sit in the chair, and you're at the desk, and you're raising your hand, and I'm over there in the corner. We're talking about what project we're doing in a couple of weeks, and I felt like I was kind of pulling the wool over Mrs. Thelman's eyes, And then you reflect back on that, the wisdom of that. You're 12 or 13 years old. That's life. There's very few things we do in life by ourselves, right? Family relationships, what I'm doing with the team. It's all about other people, how you fit in, what shared vision you have, how you interact to get there, all of that. So Mrs. Thelman was pretty wise, putting us together. We got a project. She's training us for life. And so I feel like growing up in the family that I did, we were getting trained to be great teammates each and every day, how we interacted with each other. We fought a lot. I mean, My brothers and I, to this day, I mean, we're in our 50s. We can't get through a basketball game. We throw the ball at each other. I'm not trying to paint some idyllic picture. That ain't what it is. But you know, that whole interaction, that's what life's about. And that's certainly what we try to build with our team and try to instill in our team every day.
Well, real friendships, real teams have authenticity, which means you get angry sometimes and stuff happens and you tell the truth, and hopefully in a reasonably constructive way when we control our tempers. But in fact, you talked about, I watched one of the videos of you after your UTA camp, and you were talking, you were kind of laying out the ground rules. Here's what it's going to be if you're going to be a Dallas Cowboy. And you talked about that you wanted coaches when you were growing up, and you expect your coaching staff to be truth tellers. So instead of saying, hey, great, good job, you know, I'll try a little harder next time, like you lay it out there. So you tell someone if they're not up to scratch because you think that out of respect they need to know that. Talk a bit about that part of teamwork and coaching.
Yeah, I mean, I rarely use the word hate, but the coaches that I literally hate in my life right now, that I have like, you know, this, it's kind of a visceral reaction to the coaches who told me when I was young, oh, you're doing great. You're doing great. Oh boy, you're doing great. You're the best. And they were just allowing me to be mediocre. There's a guy here, Steve Verbit, who's been at Princeton for, you know, what's it, 35 years now. Big round of applause for Verbit. And I'm going to tell an honest story about Verbs. Verbs is the DB coach here in the mid-'80s. And all of my classmates, many of them were DBs. And they literally hated Steve Verbit. I mean, they despised him. This DB, he's the absolute worst. I hate the. I mean, it's all we talked about was how bad a guy Steve Verbit is. Okay? No, I'm serious. They had pictures of him, you know, on they would put pictures of Verbit's head all over the place to gig each other. The whole thing. They're best buddies with this guy to this day. Yeah. Because he got on them, the standard was high, he held them to a high standard. So at the time, maybe they didn't like him, but ultimately he changed their lives. He put them on the right path, understanding what excellence is, how you strive for it each and every day. So the challenge that I have myself and for our coaches each day is, what's the standard here at the Dallas Cowboys? Right. And let's hold these guys to the highest standard in everything they do. How they sit in a meeting, how we walk through, how we practice, how you conduct yourself at lunch. Let's hold them to that standard. And let's be relentless coaches. Yeah. We're not their friends. Yeah. Okay, we're more like their parents. We're trying to shape them and mold them. They're like the tree. The tree's coming out of the ground. When it's a twig, it goes over here. Let's bend the twig back. Let's bend the twig back. Let's be relentless in doing that. Let's not be the ones who are patting them on the back all the time, tell them how great they are, and then letting them only be okay. Yeah. They might not like us now, but they're going to love us later. And I say this all the time. I had this coach, Norv Turner, who was my coach in Dallas, and he's one of the great coaches in the NFL, and he was on me about everything. Get back quicker, get the ball out of your hand, throw it 6 inches in front. Why are you so late with the ball? Why are you reading it? I mean, every minute of every day. I fly all over the country, Brill and I do, to go to his kids' weddings to this day. Because he wouldn't let me be okay. He was going to do everything he could to make me the best I could be. He believed in me enough to coach me to a high standard. And I think that's a big part of what our jobs are.
And that's a little bit countercultural today, where kind of what's the joke? Everybody wins a first prize trophy, when in fact real life isn't that way. That we lose as much as we win. You know, I remember back in my own college days, the best professor we had, he was the toughest one. He was called Sid the Rat. That was his name, Sid the Rat. And I have to remember his real name was Professor Miller, as it happened. Yeah. But no, there's something. So your father was also, I think, as I understand, pretty candid with you. Didn't he once in a scouting report, of as many coaching skills, that he had a real gift of being a scout, I understand. And isn't there an apocryphal story about his scouting report on you?
Oh, I don't know about that.
The one I read said that he forecast what your career would be. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I mean, my dad was the one, you know, this idea, and I think about it literally every day I walk into the building, is the greatest gift you can give in life is to believe in someone more than they believe in themselves, and instill that belief in them. And if you think about your life, I went to all these different schools. You're on a new team. You have a new experience. You have all these different things that you're doing that if you're really honest with yourself, you're a little anxious about it. Yeah. Do you measure up? Do you belong? Our life in the NFL, I mean, it's competitive. These young guys come in, they're trying to make a team. We got 90 guys in our team. We're going to cut 37 of them. We're going to go down to 53 guys. You know, they're nervous about everything they do. So ultimately our job is to instill belief in them. That's our job. And you got to give them the tools to do that. And And that's what's arguably the most rewarding part of what we do. But I think it's teaching, it's coaching, it's parenting, it's all of that stuff.
Well, you talk about also...
And my dad was the best at that.
Yeah,
he was incredible at that.
Well, didn't he also teach about detail? I remember reading somewhere that he was a big New York Yankees fan, as I recall. And he said that notice the great hitters, even they hit a home run, that they put the bat back in the rack just the way it belongs, a certain way. Yeah. Like, did you inherit that attention to rhythms and details? And
well, I just think that's more about a philosophy. Yeah. You reflect back when you're around someone who's so impactful on you, is there's so many things that this person shared with you when you're growing up that you reflect back and like, wow, that's why. So he would always talk about that. If you hit a home run or strike out, put the bat back in the bat rack the same way, independent of what the result is, and then get ready for the next opportunity. And so, he used to always talk about Mickey Mantle. Mickey Mantle, one of the great baseball players of all time. He'd hit a home run, he'd trot, he'd have his head down, he'd come back. He wasn't showing up the pitcher. He would just come back and be a pro. And then similarly, if he struck out, he would have that same emotion and, okay, what do I need to do? And fall down 7 times, get up 8. That's what life's about. We're going to have successes. We're going to have adversity. You keep coming back. You keep coming back with that same spirit. That's something that he tried to instill in all of us when we were growing up.
Well, I heard you say earlier this morning, but you've said it many times, and when we first spoke on the phone about 10 days ago, that you said that you coach, because they are men, so that you coach the man, then the player, and that's the right order. Talk about that.
Yeah, I just think that's so important. Even at our level, these are grown men, they're professional football players, but some of them are 21 years old, 22 years old, and they're still growing, and hell, I'm still growing. Right? Seriously. We have guys who are married with 4 kids who are going through issues in life that they need guidance and help with. And so that's our job. If their life isn't right, they have no chance of being their best as a football player. So what we're trying to do is help grow the man, develop the man, talk about the things that are important in life to our guys, and at the same time, coach them hard as players. And ultimately, that goes back to respect. That goes back to belief, and those are the things that are most rewarding when you're in coaching.
Yeah, we talk about things that are essential to people's life, and that kind of ties us into some of the theme of what we do in our research center in this interview series. Is for a lot of people, not everybody, but for a lot of people, their faith tradition, whatever it is, Jewish, Catholic, Protestant, whatever, that's part of who they are. It kind of makes them tick. It gives them a North Star. It gives them hope when the chips are down, and it helps keep them humble when the chips are up. If it's not too personal, share a bit of your sort of faith story, if you don't mind. I can guess your background because I know a bit, but with 7 kids, siblings, tell us about your...
Yeah, I grew up Catholic. But both my parents are from Rutherford, New Jersey, real close to where the Meadowlands is. My mom grew up on a farm called Bonnie Dell Farm, which is actually the place where the Meadowlands is now. And they live close to each other. My dad's 6 years older than my mom, and the story goes that my dad was playing professional football and he broke his leg. And my mom was just starting at Abercrombie and Fitch in New York, and her job was to go get Jimmy Garrett some new shoes, because when he broke his leg they had to cut his shoes off. And she brought the shoes to the hospital, and the rest is history. They were married. They were married a year later, and 8 kids, and the whole thing.
Yeah. They take you to mass every week.
Oh yeah. And so we grew up, Roman Catholic family. We went to Catholic schools as we were young. Mass was a huge part of our life.
Sure.
And went to Holy Cross in New Jersey. Went to St. Anne's, Our Lady of the Lake, all these different Catholic schools all across the country. And again, it was a big part of our upbringing. My wife and I, when we moved to Dallas, she didn't grow up in a Catholic tradition. And when we got married and we're living in Dallas, somehow we discovered this Methodist church on SMU's campus. Yeah. And we had gone to a wedding, then we went to a Christmas service there, and we got to know the pastor and whatever, so we joined that church, and that's been a really good thing for us over the last 25 years now.
And as you looked at, you mentioned in one of the interviews I read, and I think it was that you host this big dinner for the Methodist Hospital and a big fundraiser, and is it the Folsom Award or something? And this former pastor you gave an award to a couple of years ago, didn't you, Mark Craig? And you said once that a lot of the sermons you've heard from him kind of work their way into how you even communicate with your team. I mean, you're not doing hell and brimfire, but the values. Talk a bit about that. Well,
he's this brilliant speaker, and we were drawn to the church really because of him. you would go there every week, and he'd just give you this inspirational message. And he's a really special guy and a special communicator. And so I learned a ton from him. I learned how to speak in front of a group, and then many of his messages showed up. And I think the biggest takeaway from him is the idea that if you're a preacher, you're preaching to the same team every week.
Yeah.
You know, so his deal was, I have one sermon, I try to tell it 52 different ways. And so I'm kind of in the same boat. We got 90 guys on our team. Here comes the coach again. He's talking to the team in a room like this. And so I really have one sermon. It's about being your best in everything you do. That's my sermon. And so I try to tell that, you know, many more than 52 different ways because I'm in front of them a lot. But how do you tell that same story over and over and over again? And I thought he was masterful at it, and I'm inspired by how he did it. And so that's the challenge. And so we try to talk to our team. We use movies. We use quotes from pro athletes, quotes from people in history, tell different stories to kind of get the same message across. So he certainly was very impactful on me in that regard.
And to the extent that you kind of hit the pause button when you're in church or just in general, are there one or two biblical stories that just are kind of your favorites, like go-to places where you get a bit of encouragement or maybe helps define who you are?
Yeah, you know, we were talking about this, the parable of the vineyard. You guys know the parable of the vineyard? I don't know if I'm describing it the right way, but it's the one where, you know, the guy who's the vineyard owner hires people at 6 a.m. in the morning, and then he goes in the marketplace and hires more at 12 noon. He goes back at 3 o'clock, and then goes back at the end of the day at 6 o'clock. And at each point, he's agreed to a wage with the people who came at 6, or I'm going to pay you whatever they pay him. And then at 12 noon, 3 o'clock, and 6 o'clock, and I guess the workday ends at, say, 7 o'clock, and he's paying the wages, and it turns out that he pays everybody the same wage.
Regardless of whether they worked all day in the breaking sun or at the end of the day.
And so you grow up in the Catholic tradition, and you hear these stories when you're young, and the first thing you say, particularly when you have 7 brothers and sisters, like, that's not fair, you know? It's not fair. You know, God, this guy worked all day, he gets the same thing, and you know, you can't kind of figure that out. And at some point, somebody in my life reminded me that everyone thinks of the 6 a.m. guy, but we're all the 6 p.m. guys, right? And when you realize that and the grace of God and all of, and you know, that was a big realization for me. And I think about that a lot. I mean, we're so privileged, we have talent, we grew up in this great country, all of that. We've been blessed in so many different ways. So that change from thinking I was the 6 a.m. guy to knowing that I am the 6 p.m. guy has been significant in my life.
That's it. When my wife and I lived in London for 8 years in my investment banking days, and our pastor, a guy named John Stott, he said, isn't it funny how and not funny haha, but isn't it curious how we tend to identify, in whatever your tradition is, with the hero in the story as opposed to the person who kind of needs to do a little growing. So I appreciate you sharing that. You know, some people would say, and frankly, I passes my mind too, that so religion in sports, faith in sports. Quite often at the end of a game where your team wins, and one of the first things athletes do, professional, not just in football, but I want to give thanks to God, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And some people kind of roll their eyes and go, geez, like that's kind of cynical. Like, does God really prefer the Cowboys over the Eagles? Well, we know the answer is yes, but... so that little
Carson
theological...
Wentz, get out of here, Carson Wentz.
That little theological aside, I hope you know that, number 21. But how do you think about that? I mean, because obviously you've got a lot of players in your team who will have Bible study groups and stuff like that. And how do you think through that?
It goes back to my sermon. I got one sermon. It's about being your best. And so, you know, ultimately, I think that's what I believe you need to pray for, right? Is to have mental, physical strength to be your best in whatever the circumstances are. And I think that's where faith, regardless of what your denomination is, comes in. This idea that somehow, you know, God favors us, or He's going to help us with the weather, or you know, any of that. I don't know that I personally subscribe to that, but I do think drawing strength from your faith to allow you to be your best, certainly in adverse type situations, I think is something we all can benefit from. I know I do, and you know, I think we're all at our best. I know I am when my faith is a big part of my life, regardless of how things are going.
Right.
Oftentimes when you have success, it kind of, maybe you don't pray quite as much, or maybe it's not quite as in the forefront of your mind. You've got it all figured out. And then when you have hard times, all of a sudden you're in bed at night saying, oh God, help me get through this, And so I think I'm at my best, and I think we're probably all at our best when that's a kind of a consistent force in our life.
Yeah.
And one thing that's interesting, and in my arc in the NFL, is that I think the idea of your faith has become more prominent. You said it after a game, guys answering a question about a pass he made in the 2-minute situation, and he says, I want to thank God.
Right.
Or our teams getting together after a game, they're all on a knee. People from different teams doing a prayer. Our players after practice, there's a circle that I get in, one of our backup centers. He sits there right the exit off of our practice field. He gets a little circle with some other guys. Hey, prayer's free. Prayer's free. Guys get in a little circle, and it doesn't cost you anything. And guys come over in the circle, and
is that Coach Surrey's coming back for that?
It's not. But I think that's more prominent now than it was 30 years ago. Yeah. Old school football, drinking beers. That kind of an image. I think it's tricky. I personally think that faith is kind of personal. Yeah. When you and I talked about, hey, I want you to come, we'll talk about where faith fits into your life, all of a sudden I'm like,
deer in the headlights.
I'm a little nervous about this one, Yeah. So I think that's a tricky part of it. And life is so out in the open these days with social media and cameras everywhere, and there's so much access to people. I think it's tricky to kind of wear it on your sleeve, if you will. But I think at the end of the day, if it's authentic for the person, I think it's all a positive thing. Yeah. There's probably great stuff in the Bible about how you pray, when you pray, go to the wilderness, don't do it in town square, whatever. So those are tricky little conflicts that we all have. But I think in the end, if it comes from a good place, I think it's all positive.
Yeah. Man, one of the things that Jesus is famous for is that the one of the things he hated the most wasn't people who sinned and stuff like that. It was hypocrites. That was his biggest beef, when someone's a hypocrite. So I think when people they wear it on the sleeves, a certain religiosity, whatever tradition it might be, if their life doesn't sort of align with that, that could be a little problematic.
Yeah, well, I'll say this: we're all hypocrites.
Yeah, fair enough.
Right? I'm the first to say it. We aspire to a standard, and then we don't live up to the standard. Yeah. It's the nature of being a human being, right? So you're striving, and then you fall short again and again and again. So I think those are some of the challenges that we all have in whatever profession you're in, whatever role in that profession you have. I think it's the nature of being a human being.
Absolutely. Well, and also just another thought on this sort of religion question is of course the NFL, particularly today, and maybe always has been, but certainly today, there's Muslim players, there's Jewish players, there's atheist players, and are they going to feel part of the bigger team, and how to make sure any of these gatherings are seen as respectful and as inclusive as possible is another piece. And I know a lot of sports teams have full-time coaches on their staff. I'm writing a book, as Jenny mentioned, on workplace chaplains. So I tend to focus on the for-profit marketplace, companies and corporations, many of whom are hiring chaplains now. But you have to do it really wisely.
Yeah, I think you have to make it all optional.
Right.
Right? And so that's a big part of our culture that we have. I mean, players, pray individually before the game as a group. We do the Our Father before the game. We all take a knee. We have a team chaplain. He does chapel. We also have a Catholic Mass before games. So you try to give everybody options. You don't put any pressure on anybody, but you try to make it accessible to them.
I interviewed Mark Teixeira once from the Yankees, sort of similar kind of model as this in conversation. And he said, whenever we get together and pray, it's always for safety, for health, and to be our best. And he said, we're praying for both teams that way. And it was kind of interesting to hear him say that. It was not the stereotype that you hear. So the other thing we think about in this interview series and the work I do is ethics. And gosh, in professional sports in general, and in your industry sector, the NFL, boy, you got a handful of issues, don't you? I mean, there's health and safety issues with concussions. There's the national anthem issue. There's just a lot of real big issues. I'd like to start asking you kind of your thoughts and take on the national anthem issue. And before that, Mark, can you put the the screen back on if you hear me there? So I want to see if this helped equip you any to think about this. Can you read it? Maybe you want to step out.
Yeah.
Senior thesis, 1989, the revolt of the black athlete as initiated by Harry Edwards. who was a sociology professor, if I recall. The Impact on the Civil Rights Movement During the 1960s by Jason C. Garrett, a thesis presented in partial fulfillment of your bachelor's. First of all, it's a terrific thesis. It was a privilege to take a peek at it.
Hope you don't go to the last page because they have the grade on the last page.
So yeah, we won't go there. But
I tried my best.
No, you aspired and you did great. No, but it's really provocative and it's thoughtful, and that you were thinking of that at that age shows an uncanny, social awareness as a kid, right? You're 21 years old, but also did that in any way shape and inform some of your response to what the NFL and other teams are going through?
I'll tell you where that thesis topic came from. It was the fall of 1988. Was my senior year, so you got to come up with a topic. And I see Rob Vandenhoven's here, and Rob Vandenhoven had his senior thesis done well before we started our senior year. I was a little behind, and so we were sleeping in the bunks down in Caldwell Fieldhouse. That's where we had our training camp, and there was a Sports Illustrated article, and it was about 1968, the Yale football team, and it was a very famous football team. There's a quarterback, was a guy by the name of Brian Dowling, who was actually from Cleveland, Ohio, went to St. Anne's, where I went to grade school. So I've known about Brian Dowling forever. A guy named Calvin Hill, who was an amazing football player in the Ivy League, played in the NFL. He's the father of Grant Hill, great NBA player. They had this incredible team. They all showed up in the mid-'60s at Yale, and they never lost a game. They never lost a game in freshman football. They never lost a game as sophomores, juniors. They ended up tying their last game, 29-29 to Harvard. Is a very famous game in Ivy League football history. But there was a story about this Yale football team 20 years after. 1988, they played in 68. 20-year anniversary of this team. And how 1968, arguably the most volatile year in our country's history in recent years, riots, Dr. King, Robert F. Kennedy, all of these different things are happening, Chicago, Watts, wherever. And on college campuses all across the country, there was this great division. Yeah. This great division, social division, established, unestablished, however you wanted to decide. But the article is about how this team, this Yale football team that was so special, brought 80,000 people together on Saturday afternoon at the Yale Bowl. Regardless of what your position was on these social issues, they brought them together. They got together, they got a chance to see Calvin Hill and Brian Dowling, this amazing team. So there's a long article, a feature article in Sports Illustrated. I'm like, that's what it's about. So I literally was like, I'm going to do it on that Yale team. And once I talked to my advisor, he kind of talked to me more about what this movement was, and ultimately how it ended up at the '68 Olympics with John Carlos and Tommy Smith standing on the platform with their fists raised during the national anthem. So I just was really interested in it and how sports can have an impact. And it's really interesting when you find out more about it. This guy Harry Edwards, who was behind this movement, he was a great athlete at San Jose State. He's from East St. Louis, Illinois, and he went out there, and he was a black guy, and there was so much inequity in college sports at the time. The one that I thought was most compelling was there's a great track meet at the New York Athletic Club, and these great black athletes would come, and they were a big part of this, making this meet fantastic. They weren't allowed to stay at the New York Athletic Club. They had to stay down the street. All the white guys could stay there, right? So eventually they say, we ain't coming. We're boycotting this. And eventually they changed how they did the whole thing. So to me, that was compelling, to use sports as a medium to make social change. And ultimately it got to that demonstration in Mexico City. And I did think about that a lot as we were going through this kneeling thing. And it was as challenging an issue as that we've had in the NFL since I've been around. Yeah. And the reason
not everyone agreed, did they? Either players or coaches and owners?
The reason I say this is because my big takeaway from that was, boy, it was a huge sacrifice those guys made. Their lives changed. Tommy Smith and John Carlos came back to the United States in 1968 and they were vilified. They lived a really hard life after that. Now, when you reflect back, was that sacrifice worth it to them? You could make a compelling argument that it was. Okay, we're still talking about them years later.
Yeah.
the argument that I was trying to make to our guys is maybe there's a better way to enact some social change. The thing that I found out in this situation with our players is our players were feeling so much pressure from their families, from people in their neighborhood, from people at their church, from people everywhere about, you guys have this platform, you have to stand up, you have to take a knee to make change. You guys are all just worried about you. So they would feel this pressure day after day after day to do something, to do something. You're not going to let this established ownership just make you stand. You've been given this platform to do something, to change our lives and change our path. So they're feeling this every day. And then they're also feeling this other pressure that, the backlash from this, and shouldn't we just focus on football and all of that. So there were a lot of conflicting issues that we had to deal with and work our way through. And ultimately what we decided to do as our team is we wanted to make sure we did everything together. We did not want it to divide our team. Some guys standing like this at attention, some guys on a knee, some guys on a bench. We just didn't think that was good at all. So we had long discussions with our leadership group and our captains as to, okay, let's be sensitive to the issue, but let's somehow find a way to do this together. And what we ended up doing, our president made some really volatile comments that everybody in the league was responding to this one particular weekend. And we had the benefit of playing on Monday night. We let everybody else kind of go through the issues. And I say that.
Brilliant planning.
No,
Yeah.
I say it sincerely because it was a really challenging issue.
Gosh,
And a lot of teams were divided on it and how you figure this whole thing out. And we kind of saw what went on. We had more discussions. And ultimately we decided that we were going to go out prior to the anthem and all take a knee, all together. Our owners, all our coaches, all our players, we take a knee out by the numbers. We stand up, and then we come back to the sidelines when the anthem, and we all stand there together. And hopefully that demonstrated to people that we were sensitive to the issue, but at the same time very respectful to the flag, all the people who fought for the freedoms. So it was a really tricky issue. I'll tell you one quick story. That night, the game was in Arizona. We had this player on our team, his name was Justin Durant, a really good player for us, 10-year veteran, African-American guy. Really, I love him to death, a real pro. And our starting linebacker, Sean Lee, got hurt. And so Justin has to play a lot more than he typically would. And Justin, one of the things that I do with our players is when they come off the field, I try to look at them. I try to almost look everybody in the eye, see kind of where they are in the game. And if a guy needs a little encouragement, encourage him, hey, keep it going, just have this interaction. And Justin Durant is playing linebacker for us and doing a great job. He's making a lot of plays, he's making a lot of tackles, but as he's coming off the field, he's blank. Devoid of any emotion. He's just like this.
Which presumably is not normal, right?
It's just not normal at all. I mean, he makes this great tackle, comes off the field, head down. I'm like, this ain't good. So try to connect with him, try to interact with him. He's just, and so this goes on. We win the game, we fly back. I see him the next day. He's like this. He just ain't right. And so finally, a couple of days later, I'm like, hey, Justin, come on, let's visit. Tell me what's going on here. You're not yourself. He said, Coach, this has been hard on me. This has been really hard. I'm like, what do you mean? This whole kneeling thing? So my dad was a Marine for 25 years. He and I talked 2 weeks ago that I was gonna kneel. I was gonna kneel. He fought for our country, and he comes back, and he still feels this inequality, these inequities that we're dealing with. And it's your job. You're privileged to be in the position you are, to have the platform. I want you to kneel. I told him I was gonna kneel. And then we got together as a team, and he didn't kneel. I said, what'd your dad say when you talked to him? Granted, Justin's 31 years old, a grown man. He says, Coach, I haven't been able to call him. Wow. I haven't been able to talk to him. I got to try to figure this out. I really don't know what to do. Wow. And so he wasn't the same guy the rest of the year, and he retired after the season. And so I bring that up just to remind everybody that it's a hard issue. Yeah. It's a really hard issue. And having empathy and an understanding of where a lot of the guys are coming from and the pressures that they have. I'm the first one to say, for 250 years, there are a lot of people who have fought for our freedoms, for that flag and what that means. I make that talk 100 times to our players. But there is the other side to it. So how can we as leaders be empathetic to what that is and somehow come up with a solution? That's the one we came up with. Not perfect, but it's been a challenging issue for everybody.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, and particularly that story at the end. I mean, it just, my heart goes out, like goosebumps of what a challenging and personal thing it is. Again, it's coach the person, coach the man, and then the player. In your thesis, you talked about the use of sports as a form to dramatize racism in all aspects of American society. And then in your conclusion, you talk about the athletic movement reminded people that racism is still very much existing in America, and that it's all about equality and dignity, restoration of human dignity. And it sounds like you tried, however imperfectly it might have been, to focus on dignity.
I do think there's something in sports that's meritocracy. It's a meritocracy, and I believe that. I mean, at the end of the day, when you're coaching a football team at the professional level, we're looking for the best guys, and the guys who are going to make our team the best. I really don't care where you came from. I certainly don't care about your skin color. I had this interaction with a member of the media towards the end of our season. We actually just won a playoff game. We beat the Seahawks. And the Seahawks quarterback is this guy named Russell Wilson, who's a great player. And our quarterback is Dak Prescott, both African-American quarterbacks. And this guy who I've known forever, he's a very accomplished writer, follows me out of the locker room. And he said, Coach, I'm doing something. I want to visit with you about an article I'm doing. And I said, okay, yeah, sure, absolutely. He says, I want to talk to you about where the black quarterback is in the NFL. And I looked at him. It was just the most honest answer I could give. I said, are we really still talking about that? I mean, I don't look at Dak Prescott as a black quarterback. I don't look at Russell Wilson as a black quarterback. They're quarterbacks, and they're damn good ones. And we're lucky to have them. I mean, are we really still having that conversation? To me, it's a meritocracy. Let's pick the best guys. I don't care where you came from, what you look like, whatever. Who are the guys who are going to make our team the best? So as you work through some of these very challenging racial issues that are real, it's real. Justin Durant's story is real. One of the great things about sports is it's based on the merits. It doesn't matter that this guy's black, this guy's white, this guy came from here, this guy came from there. At the end of the day, it's a pretty level playing field based on what you do. And that's something we preach to our guys all the time. First round pick, college free agent, the only thing that matters is what you do now. And so I do think that's a really powerful thing about sports that's very positive for our society as well.
You talk about in some of your kind of building on, it makes me think that you talk about when you've got the OTA, like the 90 guys in the room before they're cut down, in one of your speeches you say that it's hard to get into this room. It's one of your refrains. It's hard to get into this room. Well, it's hard to get into this room too. Very hard, and increasingly getting harder. You and Brill have done something to try to have some young kids from disadvantaged backgrounds, from Trenton, from Camden, from the Bronx, from wherever in the tri-state area. You've done something to try to help them get, if not into this room here in the Jimmy Stewart Theater, but into Holy Cross or into Bucknell or into wherever. Would you tell us a bit about the Starfish Foundation? And would you tell us about your valedictorian that both you and Brill had one of those, wow, I can't believe we each heard the same thing. Would you tell that story?
Yeah, it was 30 years ago at my graduation from Princeton. Saj Gupta, right? He told a story. He finished his talk telling a story about this young boy who's on a beach throwing starfish into the ocean. And a woman comes upon him and asks him what he's doing. And he said there was a big storm last night, and all these starfish washed up on the beach, and if the afternoon sun hits them, they're going to dry up and die. And the woman says, if there was a big storm, the beach goes on for miles, there are millions of starfish, your effort's not going to make any difference. And with that, this young wise boy reaches down, picks up a starfish, and says, it'll make a difference to this one, and he throws it into the ocean. So Brill and I were both compelled by that, and for me, the meaning is...
Brill told me that it was as if he was speaking just to you, and both of you had that almost out-of-body experience, and then when you reconnected after, I'm just really struck by now and then it's as if God was talking to you or something.
Well, I just think there are so many problems in the world, right? Yeah. I mean, how do you handle the problems of education and poverty and whatever the issue is? And it's easy for all of us to kind of throw our hands up and say, well, Can't do much about that. I mean, can't
all
make a
gonna die anyway, right?
Yeah, can't make a dent there, you know. And so the idea is that what we're inspired by is the idea that you can make a difference and it's worthwhile. And we do this camp every year. We bring 300 or so kids from challenging backgrounds down here. And I preached to our coaches the night before that we're going to have 300 kids here. The goal is to get one of them. Let's get one guy. Let's get one guy to think that he can come to a place like this and get him on that path. We're going to have 10 hours with him tomorrow. Somehow, some way, let's impact him. And one of the things that we do, and it goes back to my oldest brother, Jim, bringing my other brothers and me here when we were in high school. I was probably going into my sophomore year of high school, and we lived over about an hour from here on the Jersey Shore. And Jim said, "Come on, guys, we're going over to Princeton." And I'm like, "What's that all? You know, why are we going to Princeton? You know?" And so we literally just walked around the campus. We dove in Woody Woo Pond. We checked out the dorms. Went down to the football field. We sat in rooms like this, and you know, at that time it was like, I want to go to a place like this. And my brother has been very generous, and he was wise to kind of put that on our radar screen. And so the idea behind this camp is to put college, Princeton or something like this on these kids' radar screen. They've never been to a place like this. They've never seen trees like this, buildings like this, any of that. So what we try to do is we split them up into 12 teams and we play the championship of the world, but it ain't about that. It's about life. In the middle of the day, we walk them up through campus very intentionally through these archways and down these paths, and we go into Makash 50, and they sit in the oldest lecture hall on campus and these wooden chairs with these blackboards, and we give them life skills. And we have pro football players talk to them, or this guy talk to them, or that guy talk to them. The idea is to say, I want to do something like this. And we've had some great stories. This guy named Freddie Santana, who came back every year from New Dorp High School in Staten Island, came back every year and ended up going to Holy Cross, graduated with honors as their captain, did Teach for America. Now he's teaching in New York and changing people's lives. So, that's the idea of using the medium to somehow, some way inspire them to do something like this.
Well, it is inspirational. It's a reminder also that when you start, it makes a difference to that starfish, and when you save that starfish's life, well, that starfish is going to save some other's life. And what Freddie's doing now, pay it forward, whatever you want to call it, there is still a multiplier effect. It's really something. I like how you're saying that the football side of it is almost like that's the teaser. That's not really why they're there.
Yeah, no question.
In fact, I saw one of the speeches that you gave that you said to these boys, these emerging young men, that I want you to don't ask these famous football players for their autographs. Ask them something about life. When you talk to Dak Prescott,
absolutely,
you don't want his autograph. You want to hear a story. You want to hear something that could change your lives.
And what you find out is our players get so much out of the experience because they remember sitting in that same chair. Yeah. They remember what it was like to be a 16-year-old kid. The odds are a little bit against you. You don't come from the right place. You have some ability. Where's it going? What's going to happen in my life? And maybe they were impacted by somebody in an environment like that, and I think they're challenged by that, and I think they embrace that idea. So let's not do the autograph thing, the picture thing all day. Let's spend 5 minutes with Dak Prescott, right? And he's going to have a real positive impact on your life.
Yeah. And I want to also give a shout out to Coach Suris and Verbic, because they're a big part of this. They're all in, and they're coaches.
Princeton opens its doors.
Big shout out there. And I'm sure when this year's 10-0 team looks back there, of course they're going to remember that, but it's the character messages. It's all these other pieces. It's ethics. It's how you show up. A couple of the players, I serve as a faculty fellow. It's a real privilege to do, and it's amazing how much they're really interested in life skills and not just football skills. So. Well, look, I'm mindful of time. You've got to fly down to see Coach K, I think, for an engagement. So I could keep talking and listening to you for hours. But there's one other religion question I was going to ask you, and that's Bruce Springsteen. Like, isn't he just sort of like, come on now? The wisdom and spiritual wisdom in his stories. I was listening to one of his old bootlegs last night to kind of get in the mood for today. So, but we won't go there. We'll save that for another time. Well, folks, would you all give me a super big round of applause for Jason's time? I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much. It was great. And, see you. All right. Come on up here.
Now, let me just ask you a question. This is interactive. I mean, we like this guy the best, right? I mean, look at this guy out of here. Good to see you guys.
So I'll close with one thought. I hope you all remember Jason's sermon. Like your pastor, Craig, that he had one sermon, and that your sermon would you just repeat it for us again so we can go away remembering your sermon? Because I think it's a life sermon.
It's pretty simple. It's just simply about being your best. And we make a distinction with our players all the time. There's a difference between trying your best and being your best. And being your best is all about, preparation, mental and physical toughness in our business, and all of that. So that's really what we're trying to do. And there's so many, something I share with them all the time, there's so many inspirational figures in our life each and every day. And so that's what we're trying to do. We will fall short. Okay, we're human beings. We're going to fail. We're going to fail miserably over and over and over again. But I do think that Fred Heinlein wisdom, fall down 7 times, get up 8 applies. So it's what we're trying to instill in our guys individually, what we're trying to instill in them collectively, and that's the sermon. So we try to tell a lot of different ways, but ultimately I think it's what matters most.
All right, thanks a lot again.
Come on.